Hey, welcome back. Last episode, we talked about how communication isn't really a skill, how it's decision-making made visible. If you didn't listen to that, you need to go back and listen because it talks about how everything that we communicate is actually a micro decision that we make subconsciously or unconsciously. But today I want to stay right there. I want to talk because if communication keeps breaking down for you, there's something underneath it that most leaders miss. So even if it's communication that keeps breaking down to your team, it's clarity. But it's not the kind of clarity that people typically mean. It's at the level you're operating. Clarity isn't about making sure everyone understands. It's not about long conversations, making things really wordy, or even head nods around the table. Clarity is something you establish, not something you manage. And so at the moment that you see this distinction, a lot of this drag that you've been feeling suddenly makes sense. And you're able to make it disappear. Hey friend, welcome to A Leader's Purpose podcast. My name is Tami and I'm an executive advisor and leadership strategist. And this podcast is for leaders who are doing well on paper, but behind the scenes things feel heavier, slower, or more complicated than it should. And we talk about what actually drives clear decisions, steady confidence, and leadership that doesn't require constant second guessing. And so here's what I've noticed. The leaders who have crossed this threshold, the leaders who have the clarity that's owned and not managed, the decisions feel settled. Not because everyone agrees. So one thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that not everyone has to agree with you on your team. Now that you need to come to an understanding, this is where it's like, okay, agree to disagree. We agree on a common mission. We agree on a common outcome. We may not agree on every decision that happens because not everyone has to agree, but everyone has to know who owns what's been decided, what's still open for conversation or discussion, and what's no longer up for discussion. And you know those teams where decisions get made and then things just move? That's not chemistry, it's ownership. And that's where we want to get to, right? We want to take massive action. We want to reach our goals. We don't want for every decision to be dependent on you as the leader. So if you're leading strategy and not just facilitating input, that's the version of clarity you actually need. So most leaders I work with are really good at building consensus. They bring people along, they invite input, and they care deeply about alignment. And honestly, that's how they got where they are. And this is not a bad thing. Consensus is good. But here's the shift that sneaks up on them. They start applying consensus to every decision. Not because consensus is wrong. Again, this may be what got you where you are. But it's because they haven't recalibrated when it's needed and when it's not. So everything becomes a discussion. Everything stays open a little bit too long and decisions start coming back around over and over. And if a decision keeps returning to the meeting, it was never owned. And that's the drag you're feeling. That's where you feel like all the decisions are dependent on you and you have to keep driving these. And so let me say this cleanly. Let me say it clearly. Clarity isn't everyone nodding. It isn't a long explanation. It isn't even agreement. Clarity is knowing who owns what's been decided, and what's settled. And if you can't name the owner in just one clear sentence, it's not clear yet. So clarity isn't agreement, it's ownership. So let's talk about what's actually happening underneath. Because you've been taught that good leadership means inclusion, input, and consensus. And when you're building trust and psychological safety, that's true and needed. But some decisions don't need consensus. They need a clear owner. And executives spend an enormous amount of time redeciding things that were supposedly decided or already settled. I read a statistic recently that executives spend 40% of their time in meetings. I remember when I was in the Air Force, and it felt like I spent way more than 40% of my time in a meeting, especially those meetings that could have been a simple email. But this is a lot of 40% of your time. If you think of it in terms of dollars, of ROI, that means 40% of your income, of the revenue that you spend on your income, is you sitting in meetings circling the same decisions. Not because people are difficult, it's because the system is fuzzy. It's when everything feels like it's still open, people keep checking back in and keep adding their 2 cents and keep saying, just one more thing. And they're not resisting you. They're looking for the boundary. And if you're still explaining a decision weeks later, that's not a communication problem. It's a clarity problem. It's an ownership problem. And here's what changes when you make this shift. When you stop managing agreement on decisions that just need ownership. And again, I'm not talking about every decision. There are some decisions that you do need consensus because you need buy-in. But there's a lot of decisions that you can just make, and it doesn't mean that you are leaving people out. But you can stop managing agreement on decisions that just need ownership. And this means you empower your people to make decisions. And then it doesn't feel like they're the ones always dependent on you. So your team knows when their input matters and when the call has already been made. It's been decided. Whether they agree with it or not, they know the direction to move forward. And senior leaders need to stop waiting for permission and start standing in responsibility. And I say it this way, it's our responsibility as a leader to set those boundaries, to set the tone, to own or designate who owns these decisions so that way we can move forward. As a leader, you have a bigger, broader picture of what's going on. You can see things at a higher level. And so there are some decisions that are detailed important. Like they need the details, they need the buy-in. But then there's some decisions that actually it's already been decided. You just need someone to run with it and go and execute. And this isn't, again, to leave people out. This is to empower your team to take responsibility and ownership and run with things. So stop waiting for permission and start standing in this responsibility. And you can stop carrying decisions that were never meant to live on your shoulders in the first place. So many leaders come to me and just, my team is so dependent on me. When you have to ask yourself why? Why is that? And is it because, have you offered them the ownership in the execution? Have you made the final decision and said, okay, Sue, go with this. Okay, John, that's yours. I like where you're going. Tell us what you need. But a lot of these decisions were never meant to live on your shoulders in the first place. So when you remove them and you give ownership to your people, execution speeds up. Not because you're cutting people out, but because the system finally knows where the decisions live. And this is where we can understand and we can see who's really good at owning decisions. How can we train our other leaders to own decisions as well? How can we empower them to take the ownership and execute? So what actually has to shift? You need to move from managing clarity through explanation to establish clarity through ownership. From consensus that's as the standard to decision ownership as the standard. Does everyone understand to, is this clear who owns this and what is settled, what's been decided? And that's the move. It's subtle, but it changes everything. And so I'm sure you're asking, okay, great, Tami, but how? So glad you asked. It's in the questions you're asking in the moment. And I love questions. And so here's 3 simple questions that you can run every decision through. No overthinking, no worksheets. First is, does this decision require input or does it require an owner? If input won't change the direction, this isn't a consensus decision. And it may have been at one point a consensus decision, but now that it's been settled, it needs an owner for execution. And it's so much easier for your people to know whether they own it or not if that is clear. If this comes back up, here's the second question. If this comes back up next week, what will it tell me? And if the answer is that was never really decided, then it's ownership that was missing. And again, ask for an owner, dictate, tell them who the owner is, who makes sense that this owns it. Is it a department or is it a person? And then the third question is, can one person clearly say, this is mine? And if no one can say that sentence, the decision is still floating. And so I talked with one of the leaders this past week, and she was talking about how many times unknowingly they'll have multiple people work on the same task. how two people simultaneously in their own office, on their own floor, working on the exact same task. And so one person went one direction, one person went the other direction, but they wasted time working on the exact same thing. That's because the ownership was missing. No one could clearly say, this is mine. And so the decision still floated. And because your team wants to carry things, wants to execute, wants to take ownership and wants to take action, they want the goal, they're going to take things that aren't necessarily theirs because they need it. They know it needs to be done. So those 3 questions alone will tell you if the clarity is leaking, like where clarity is leaking, and where leadership needs to step forward. And that is the shift. So here's what I want you to do, because I know that a lot of times we need to understand it. We need to see it before we can decide what to do about it. So here's what I want you to notice this week. And we're not fixing anything yet. I want you to notice which decisions feel settled and which ones keep resurfacing. Just kind of keep a tabs, just keep a list. And I do this for myself as well. It's crazy how many times that I'll make a decision or a direction, or I'll come up with a strategy. And then, 2 weeks later, I'm like, I need to rethink this. And I don't go back to the strategy that I already decided. This is not something that you should be doing. This is a time waste. And I realized when I got clear on this, how much time I was wasting redeciding things that were already decided and still good enough. So notice where you feel the urge to re-explain something that you thought was already decided. How many times is there a little bit of information that was added, or that was you needed to re-explain something that you've already made the decision about, that you've already clarified, that you've already put forth into action, but you feel the urge to re-explain it. And then the third one is I want you to notice where your energy drops, not because the work is hard, but because the decision never really landed. It never took ownership, even if you're the owner of it. If it keeps coming back, that's telling you something. So I just want you to notice. I want you to think about this week, because when we start to bring things to light, when we start to notice patterns, that's when we can interrupt them. That's when we can make some massive changes really quickly. And this is not about quick fix, but this is understanding and making adjustments as we go that changes everything. So if this is landing and you're already seeing some of these patterns emerge, most leaders manage clarity. Leaders at your level establish it. When you're ready to reset decision ownership across your team, that's the work that I do. That's the work that I love to do. It's what I just love to do it. That's the work that I see the most change in. But for now, awareness is enough. Patterns shift the moment we can name them, which is why it's so important that we start to notice. And you just named one. So not every decision needs consensus. Some just need clarity on who owns it. And when you're ready, at that system level, when you're ready to reset decision ownership across your team, let's chat. You can either DM me on LinkedIn at Tami Imlay, TamiImlay. I think that's my LinkedIn handle. But also you can email me at TamiMarieCoaching.com, Tami at TamiMarieCoaching.com. But even faster, just hop on a call. TamiMarieCoaching.com/call, and let's chat. Let's get this whole idea of decision fatigue, decision friction, decision drag. Let's remove it really quickly. All right, friend. Not every decision needs consensus. Some just need clarity on who owns it. I will see you next week. Bye for now. Before you go, I just want to say thank you for spending this time with me. I know your attention is valuable and I don't take it lightly. If this episode gave you language for something that you've been carrying, I'd love for you to give me a rate and review on the podcast. This helps the conversation reach others and other leaders who need to hear it. It also helps me see what landed and what you want more of. And if leadership starts to feel heavier than it should, you don't have to figure it out alone. You can book a leadership strategy call in the show notes, TamiMarieCoaching.com/call. And until next time, lead with clarity, stay grounded in who you are, and choose joy until joy chooses you. Bye for now.